Unashamed and Afraid, a show unashamed about sexual addiction recovery and unafraid of coming unto Christ for healing, where we share real recovery stories, learn from experts, and share resources that actually work. So join us in being unashamed and unafraid.
Hey.
What up?
How you doing, man?
So welcome back, James, to another
Thanks,
episode.
Steve.
We're here with our friend Josh, coming from the hot AZ down there in the Phoenix area, the East Valley, right, of Queen Creek,
Arizona.
Yes, and what is the temperature today in August? Right. I heard it was quite cool.
It is, as always. It says it's 101. That's actually not bad for August. 101 feels like 103. So it's. Why do we do the feels like thing? Isn't that stupid? Just tell me. If it feels like 103, just tell me it's 103.
Because that's what I'm going to experience.
That's what I'm going to experience. Yeah. Well, and I say that joking because for a lot of the rest of us, we would consider that hot. But that's a good low in August in the Phoenix
cool.
area.
Refreshing, like you said.
So,
cool.
Yes. So how we ended up on this episode. So Josh is sending me emails, and anyone who knows this, James, you know this. I'm a terrible texter.
Correct.
I hate texting.
Correct.
It might be because I never graduated from the Derek Zoolander School for Kids Who Can't Read Good and other stuff. Just my, dyslexia learning. I'm terrible. James has to edit everything I ever write.
Just because you can't spell doesn't mean that it's just a thing.
Anyways, I'm terrible at sending emails. So Josh and I are kind of emailing back and forth. A typical response at the end of every show when we're like, send us an email, reach out. We do respond to everybody.
Yeah.
Typically, my response is just like, awesome. Here's my phone number. Could we get on a phone call about this for 10 minutes? Because I'd rather do that than send you a big long email.
I'll send you an email.
Yeah, James will send you an email. James at Unashamed and Unafraid will send you an email.
But
.com.
Steve will call you.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm a let's call. Let's get on the phone. So I just thought we'd up the ante here with our friend Josh down in the cool Arizona. And I'm like, hey, how about you just come on the show and ask these questions? And Josh said...
Well, what I first said was, ish just got real here. but yeah, I said, sure, that sounds like fun. Let's get on a podcast.
And Josh, you would describe yourself as someone in recovery.
Well, that kind of goes to the email, right? It was stemming from
I know. I'm
yeah,
poking
you
the
are.
bear.
No, so it was stemming from episode 113. So anyone who hasn't listened to it, I definitely recommend. I'm a believer, right? It's about recovery versus recovered, right? Two different words, and yeah, I guess if I had to put myself into a box, right, maybe I'd say I'm in recovery. But that was kind of where the questions went, right? These are my feelings on this, and this is where I'm at, and that's what led to where we are today.
So if you gave us your whole story in 2 minutes. Ready, go.
Okay, all right. So grew up in Albuquerque, New Mexico. I'm a millennial. I was born in the 80s. Was not raised a member or not born into the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, but I am a member now. I'm a convert to that. I converted and joined the church in my 20s in 2004 after I moved from Albuquerque to Arizona, where I've lived since 2001. I've also fortunately was able to meet my now wife Jessica at work, and we're coming up on 20 years married in January. Very lucky to have her. She's amazing, and we have 4 incredible children, varying ages here, and I work in IT. And yeah, it's been an interesting journey, I guess, for the sake of this podcast, right? What we normally talk about. I had an interesting childhood when it comes to, I guess, sexual behavior, sexual energy. And at an early age, I was kind of exposed to sexual thoughts and sexual feelings. It was nothing I would call necessarily traumatic, but, kind of innocent, involved sibling. So, but that definitely got kind of formed in my mind and led me on a path of exposure to those types of things, or maybe allowing myself to see those things. So I saw pornography from an early age in magazines, probably about 10 or 11, saw videos pretty early around 12 or 13, and watched it and really kind of consumed it, I guess, as a teenager and then into my adulthood. And unfortunately, in a very formative time in my life, my parents split up. It was a kind of messy separation, and so that probably added a little fuel to the fire of some of that acting out on my journey. But then, yeah, as I became an adult, I would never say I called myself religious, even though both my parents believed in God. My mom's Jewish, my dad was raised Catholic, but basically Christian, and they both promoted a lot of
Mm-hmm.
Christian values in the house, but it was never really labeled, and we didn't really go to church.
Yeah.
And so I didn't really have that faith or that relationship with God in my life, or even close to any kind of relationship with Christ. And by the time, again, after that separation and that experience of going through that as a teenager, I probably, for all intents and purposes, became an atheist. I thought I knew better. I think I would call myself an agnostic because I wanted to sound smart. But
Mm-hmm.
but uh,
Yeah.
but ultimately
Yeah.
I thought I knew better, and I'm grateful that my wife kind of introduced me in a very, very supportive way. And I investigated, asked a lot of questions, prayed a lot, and eventually met with missionaries. And then at 24, I was baptized. But that sexual behavior, that compulsive behavior, kind of continued. There's an open conversation about it with my wife. She's very understanding. And I spent a lot of my 20s and 30s trying to, I guess, suppress it, right? It wasn't the right
Mm-hmm.
way to act. And I put this in my email as well, right? Like I feel like I've been a lot of my life trying to fit myself into this square peg, right? Or was it opposite, right? Is it a round square peg,
Yeah.
round
Square peg,
round hole
round
kind of thing? But
hole.
this
As Willy Wonka would say, strike
yeah,
that,
strike that.
reverse
Reverse
it.
it.
You
Yeah.
know, whatever. Right.
But I tried to fit
Yeah.
myself into that hole of what it meant to be a worthy priesthood holder in elders quorum, right? And I did, and so many of the guys in my elders quorum, for all their credit over the years, and they're great men. Most of them grew up in the church, served a mission, did all these things that I never experienced, had families and a lot of the church in
Yeah.
their life, and I didn't, and my family still to this day aren't members, right? And so I was kind of felt out of
Yeah.
place, so continue to kind of struggle with that idea of, well, I want to do these things. This is part of me, this sexual energy, these compulsive behaviors, but I'm not supposed to be doing it, so I can fit this mold. And eventually, I had to disclose to my wife not too long ago that I kind of formed a lot of regular compulsive behavior around masturbation to real women, right? Fantasizing about women in my life, people she knew, right? And stuff like that. And so that was
Yeah.
very
Yeah.
hard. It was very difficult for her. I thought it was less impactful or less negative than me looking at porn. Right? I thought porn was more dangerous because in my
Yeah.
head that's a compulsive behavior, that's an addiction, it's really bad. It's like a drug for me. This other one's just fantasizing. I'd never do anything, but that I learned was the opposite for her. And so we went through a lot, and
Yeah.
that's when my recovery journey really, I think, started. I was sober for a good 3 years, but then eventually, stress and things came up around 2019, 2020, and I found my way kind of back, never back to that type of behavior, masturbation, fantasizing, or lusting like that, but
Sure.
back to, pornography and other compulsive type behaviors. And I've kind of been going back and forth ever since.
Yeah, and we'll honor your speaking from the I, right? Because like I shared when I reshared my story about prostitution happening, and then when I'm like I had this thing, with a woman I was in a yoga class with, this kind of more like an affair, and in my mind that was so much worse. I had someone send me an email that they're like, how can you say that is so much worse than like prostitution and human trafficking? And I'm like, oh no, I'm not. I'm just saying, like, in my moral scale of like bad sin, worse sin, the worst sin, like on my objective moral scale, that's how I
Yeah.
placed it. And I think that you actually said something beautiful about recovery, that you're like, in my moral scale, I thought I was doing something not as bad. I thought it was a lesser of the two sins in my scale, but the impact it had on your wife, she gets to have her own
Hmm.
experience, right? So I think that's a beautiful way to just name of how we really hold our partner's pain,
Hmm.
right? Is acknowledging what it is for them is real, right?
Right. However they perceive it.
Yeah.
Yeah, and
Right. If he's talking about, women that he's interacting with in his real life and his versus his fake life through pornography, right? So to him, and to her, it's like, no, these are actually people that are in our daily walk.
that feels more
That,
painful,
yeah,
more
that-
betrayal.
right?
Yeah, to totally honor that space. And your experience is true to you because that's why you had the mindset you had. You just shared it, right? So, what was your initial reaction when we're like, there's recovery and there's recovered?
Yeah, that was for me the initial, like my knee jerk when Chris said that he was recovered. Like I was like, that's BS. There's no way, right? And not necessarily because I subscribe to the thinking that once an addict, always an addict, or that you're always in recovery. Because I think I don't believe in that either. I think that's BS too, but more because it felt like it had this finality to it, like you won,
Mm-hmm.
right? Where or you finished this part of your life, and it made me think of there's a recent conference talk from Elder Renland where he talks about the you know, the plan of salvation, how it's like this growth. And in particular, he says, let's talk about the enduring to the end piece. It's not like this separate step where we just hunker down. You know, I'm good. I've achieved
Yep.
it. Now I just hunker down and just live out the rest of my life until I get to heaven kind of thing. It's
Mm-hmm.
this, he put, enduring
Mm-hmm.
to the end is repeatedly and iteratively applying the other elements of the doctrine of Christ, creating this powerful virtuous cycle that President Nelson described. So that was what was tough for
Yeah.
me
But
because I felt like
yeah.
being recovered was kind of this, yeah, like you did it. And I just I don't feel like that's the case. You're always, recovery is not about winning. It's about growing, learning about yourself, being challenged, and understanding and accepting so much of that journey until the end. Not until, you know, you reach this point and now cool, I got it, and cool, I just hunker down and wait for heaven when they say, here you go, you did what you needed to do and you
Yep.
maintained. Now you got the ticket.
Yep.
Right.
So as you listened to the whole episode, did it change your mind at all? Or are you still like, guys, this is BS,
Yes,
stop
I hate
talking
you
like
guys.
that?
No, so
We're open. We're
no,
open. No, we're
I
open. Stuff's changed
yeah,
for us. So
I
yeah.
did, I did. I think that as I listened to it and you guys had that
So
dialogue,
what changed?
it
Yeah.
was more of his perspective on it, and you know, I mentioned this in the email, right? I started reading Kurt Franklum's book, Is God Disappointed in Me? Amazing book, right?
A
A
banger. Everybody
banger
read
read. I'm
it.
on the second read right now, but the reread.
Nice.
But yeah, it talks a lot about that idea of shame, right? And shame is a very personal thing. It's a tool that Satan uses with each of us in individual ways. And I think a big thing
Yes. Preach.
around
Yeah.
my initial reaction to Chris saying he's recovered, it was driven by that. It was driven by that, what maybe looks like pride, but it's probably more shame that, no, I know better. There's no way. Like, but really what was making me upset was the fact that it's like, if he could do it, then why can't I be? What's wrong with me that I can't be
Yeah.
recovered, or I don't agree that that's possible? And what I learned later is that wasn't what he was saying, right? He wasn't saying that, like, I won, you
Right.
guys, good luck to you. Hopefully, you know, get to my level sort of thing. It was more of, no, that's just, I just feel like I'm at a point in my journey that's no longer, the challenges of what I would consider the challenges of recovery are no longer challenges. And that made more sense to me because it wasn't like he was saying, I'm good, you're broken.
Yeah. No, I like that, and I always think about it of like and I think we use this in the episode, the analogy of going to the doctor. Like if you have a broken arm, like you're gonna get a cast, you're gonna fix that arm. That arm is healed, recovered, ED,
Hmm.
right? That doesn't mean that you're not gonna walk out of the parking lot and tear your ACL or get COVID or, break
Right.
another bone in your body. So it's not that you're just like you say hunkering down, waiting for God to just scoop you up and put you on a cloud because you've
Yeah.
arrived, but just that piece can be healed. That piece of what you're going through can be done. So I think that's well said.
Yeah.
Well, and because we were talking about this before with Josh, is for me, I have James and Chris are our examples because Chris is 17 years, nothing ever, not masturbating one time, not looking at porn for real, for real. You can meet the guy, size him up and down. He's for real. And I look at you, James, because we have this conversation, and James will 6 months down the road or 9 months down the road look at porn for 5 minutes, if
Yeah,
that,
yeah.
right? Whatever. But I look at both of you, and I would consider you in many ways no longer in the recovery. Like I see people who have first disclosed or are first in discovery or are separated and trying to figure out the pain. Like if Christy were here, she would say you're different. I mean, I know, I sit with her.
Right.
She would say you're different. Our sexuality is restored. Our marriage is restored.
Yeah.
Like the healing has happened.
Right.
Yet on your sobriety resume, you don't have the perfection that
The
Chris
17
has.
years. Yeah.
And I think that's the shame you're talking about, Josh, is when you hear that word recovered, it's like, oh, perfection or you suck.
Yeah. Well, and I think it's something we tell ourselves, right? We could blame Satan,
Mm-hmm.
We could say shame is that, like what Kirk Franklin says, right? The shame is that powerful tool, but I'm also not a fan of the victim mentality, right? Like I don't like that, and I don't like this
Mm-hmm.
idea that, oh yeah, Satan's always working against me, so what can I do? Tough luck, right?
Well,
You
and
know?
I think let's be clear because we talked about this before. I want to give you credit, Josh. We've talked about this before the episode. When you're talking about where we assign that blame to Satan, I don't hear anyone nowadays being like, "Well, the devil
Yeah,
made
the
Devil
me
made
devil
do
me
made
it."
me
do it.
do it.
No, they're placing the blame on my
Mhm.
church, my experience at church. They're placing the blame on their parents. They're placing the blame on their spouse. They're placing the blame on their therapist or the
Mhm.
recovery community or guys like, podcasts like this or whatever that, they did it wrong. So thus I'm a victim of what happened. And I want to say there are things that happen that people are victims of
Oh,
for
for sure.
sure.
I
People have
agree.
been harmed in therapy. People have been harmed by leaders in their church, by family, by people in the recovery space that look and sound like us. So I'm not minimizing, there is actual things that happen. But to your point, it comes back to
Yeah.
me.
And I think that's a great opportunity for us, right? Is to, that wouldn't isn't that what Christ really wants? Is for us to say, yes, like we're not going to pretend and sweep everything under the rug, but we still have to lead with
Mm-hmm.
love. And that's self-love, right? I love myself. I accept who I am now, even with this in my past, or even with these feelings and these
Yep.
compulsions and all those things, but also I accept others, right? Like I think one thing I've learned recently, it's been an interesting one, is as I struggle with pornography specifically, is praying for those individuals, those actors and actresses, right? Like they're people, and to pray for them is a very powerful thing because there's so many things that led them to make those choices that do that.
Mm-hmm.
And it doesn't mean this idea of fear, right? Fearing your addiction or fearing pornography or lust like it's the boogeyman. It's it took me a while, but I finally started realizing is that's interweaved with this idea of shame. And I feel like honestly I kind of
Mm-hmm.
did that just a
Yeah.
second ago. I blamed, right? I said, "Oh, this elders quorum, they have this perfectly round hole and I never fit in it." But it's like in reality, they probably never intended to do that. The church never said that you need to meet this, but that's a feeling that I let myself, hold to and used in terms of strengthening that shame.
Yeah. Well, and I would say that that would be like a tool of the adversary trying to mingle the philosophies of men, so to speak, with Scripture. It's that confusion that can get created, of like, hey, this, and it wouldn't surprise me at all if that's how Satan's working, of like planting some irrational logic into there that sounds actually pretty logical from a shame script
Yeah.
Well,
perspective.
and just the unassignable, right?
Right.
Man, the church is so shaming. I'm always like, what are you
Yeah.
talking about?
Right.
Well, just the culture of perfectionism. And I'm like, yeah, like give me the actual story. Like
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
sat down with your congregational leader and he said you're not enough because, or what, like what was the
Yeah.
actual experience? And it's in this silence and secrecy of shame that I'm just like, oh well, I sat and I had a good friend, shout out to Preston Miller, who's a good friend of mine, who's not a recovery guy, but he just said he had someone talking to him once when he made some mistakes, in his life, and was sharing the story about a friend. He's like, hey, you're going to go to church and you think, because it was kind of public what had happened with his buddy, and this guy gave the advice. He said, you're going to go to church and you're going to think that everyone is talking about you. But walk in there and look around, and what you're going to find out is everyone has their own problems and they don't actually care.
Yeah.
Like you're not that important. You're not that big
Yeah.
of a deal.
Yeah.
Right? So like I promise like whatever that is isn't trying to that standard of recovered means perfection. I'd just be curious to anyone listening where you actually got that message.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because I don't know that it was ever said to you. I think some things were said, and then Satan was like, oh, let me connect the dots for you. See, Josh, you're listening to a recovery podcast, and you'll never be like
Yeah.
Chris. You're bad and less than. Bristle away. Turn the episode off, whatever. So, I just think that's
Yeah.
powerful dialogue. That you can never look at porn again. That's real.
Yeah.
That's true. We
Yeah.
know a bunch of people who've done it. Like it's within reach. It's very possible.
Yep.
And can happen for all of us. Okay, I'm going to your other email now, Josh. We're switching
Okay.
topics. So, hello, friends. First off, thank you. You're welcome, Josh. Y'all have been very instrumental in my continuing recovery. So, my question is, ... Feel the suspense, James. Are you feeling it?
Pretty bad right now. Will you just keep reading?
Please keep reading. Well, I'd love your thoughts on self-care versus discipleship. Jesus says to take up your cross daily. Don't look back when you are plowing. Give up everything and follow me. We have the famous President Hinckley, forget yourself and go to work. And I believe that, but sometimes I don't feel like I can keep that pace. Any of that makes sense. Thanks for all you do. See you at boot camp. Yo.
So I haven't been participating in any of these emails, so this is my first time.
Oh, hold on.
hearing
Hey,
Weird.
hold on.
Because
Hold
it
on,
says
Steve. Steve.
to James.
No, Steve, hold on. We might need to end the post because that's not my email. It's not me.
This is to your email. Oh, this isn't you. This is other
Let's edit and
Josh.
post.
Wait, hold on. No, other Josh.
Other
This Josh is going to answer your email.
Okay, Josh, you answer his
Hey,
email.
other Josh, that is awesome.
Oh, my goodness.
So, that is
love
yes.
you,
I
that-
like it though.
that is
I
two
love it
Joshes.
though. That's Joshes think alike, dude.
No, you know what, Josh? Yeah, we're gonna get your take on this.
Yeah, you
anyways.
go, Josh. What's your take?
Okay, yeah, hit us with that. So, discipleship versus the self-care. Don't know. Our other Josh who's listening.
Yep.
Shout out to the other Josh. Tell us about
Yeah,
that.
no, I
Your
think
thoughts.
it actually.
Discipleship versus
It
self-care.
actually kind of ties to one of my other questions that I brought to this. Maybe that wasn't in our email dialogue, right?
Yes.
Is this
Sure. Yeah.
like discipleship again carries this idea of I have to be at a certain level, right? I have to
Yeah.
be worthy and willing and able to go and follow Christ, to throw down my nets. And I thought about this a lot recently, and what was really interesting is as I thought and pondered and prayed on it, I was like, he didn't go ask people who were necessarily the strongest, most powerful, most richest and well put together people, right?
Mhm.
The only thing that they did that differentiated them was they chose to follow him, and others didn't, mind you, right? There were other people that he gave the opportunity to follow that said
For
no.
sure.
Like, there's the famous one of the rich guy, right? So
Well, and
and Nicodemus too,
Nicodemus.
right? And so the truth is, like, discipleship again, is that a mechanism? Is that for me not only a mechanism of driving shame and unworthiness, but also kind of a trigger? Like that's the thing that I started leading down, right? Is this idea when you're trying to say, am I worthy? Am I being a worthy disciple? Am I striving to be a worthy disciple? Well, if I'm being selfish, if I'm trying to keep myself strong in ways that help me, like through self-care, and everybody's self-care is different. My self-care, I've come to realize, is very different than everybody else's, and the church is not telling me
For
exactly
sure.
how to do it, and I shouldn't expect them to. But that's almost at odds with discipleship, because it's all supposed to be out. The only way you can follow Jesus is if you drop your nets and commit everything to anybody else but yourself. And I don't think that's true, but it is this real perception that we have and that we put on ourselves, maybe as driven by our shame, but maybe also, kind of reinforced in the world through various means.
I don't know. For me, the first thought that came to me was the scripture of "Don't run faster than you have strength."
Mm-hmm.
Like, so God's like, yeah, do all of these things in wisdom, and in moderation.
It is not doctrine to do all things in moderation. Is nowhere in Christianity doctrinally. It's one of my cultural pet peeves.
Okay,
Yeah, but
not to run faster than you have strength is in there.
for sure. I think where I go, tell me what you think about this, guys. Where I go is the all in is the choosing to put on the team jersey.
Yeah.
The all in is I'm in. Give me the team jersey, put me out on the field, I'm all in. It doesn't mean that I play and practice at 100% all the time. that is in my human nature. Sometimes I need to walk off the field and get a water bottle.
Right. If I don't go drink, I'm going to die because I'm playing on the field all the time.
Right. Or
And then
because I have an
that's service to
injury,
nobody.
I'm going to miss our next road game.
Yeah.
But to me, the all-in is I don't take the jersey off. So, like, going back to you and Chris, my personal opinion is, and I mean this 100%, I think when Chris dies and meets him, James, and I think when you die and meet him, I think God's perception of where you're at in your sexual sin will not be any different. I really don't. I think the atonement is, and God's grace is that broad. I don't think there will be any dialogue from your father that says, I don't know, James, you had all those other 5-minute slips. You know, why weren't you all in?
Mm-hmm.
Discipleship. Discipleship, Josh.
You didn't take up your cross.
You didn't take up your cross. You
Yeah.
were, but Chris did because the thing happened. I think you are as much wearing the jersey as Chris is, or myself, or you, Josh. Right? Like I, to me, that's that how those no longer become a contradictory to each other.
Yeah.
Because Christ said no to people.
Mm-hmm. Yep. He said no. He took naps. He spent days away praying to his Father. That sounds like self-care to me.
Mm-hmm.
And he let
However,
his disciples be the men they are, in a lot of ways.
Yes.
And
still does.
Still
I
does.
think. Yeah, I just think it's about is my heart committed versus
Yeah.
how fast I'm running.
Sure. I mean, and yes, sacrifice is a principle of the gospel.
For sure.
But sacrifice, that principle, the godly and true principle of that, doesn't mean that you can't take care of yourself, because if you don't take care of yourself, like, you won't have anything left to give. You won't have anything to sacrifice.
Yeah.
Right.
Like, I can work myself to the bone, burn myself out really quickly, and then I'll be of no good to anybody. And to me, the reason for self-care is to fill up the well so that you can then go out and give again. I think God gives us this principle in nature. When you look at winter and a tree, what does a tree do? In the winter,
Yeah.
it draws into itself its strength again. It deepens its roots. And then in the summer and spring and summer, it now produces fruit again,
Mm-hmm.
because it took the season of rest to
Yeah, I
draw
like
within and deepen its roots, so that then it could go back out and provide fruit. Like, I
Mhm.
think God is teaching us something in nature.
Yeah.
Can I take, because shout out again to other Josh, for bringing this one to the table, because this is good, but it kind of leads me down this path of the subjectivity, right? Of just like discipleship is so, that really is. There's a lot of different ways you could look at that. There's a lot of ways that you could strive to meet that standard, and really, what is that standard?
Yes.
But also self-care too, right? Like, the idea of self-care, what is it? What I Google when I say, what is self-care? Is that what self-care is? Is it what my therapist told me? Is it what my wife does? No, like, self-care is also extremely subjective, especially in recovery for me. Like, I had to, and that was another one of my questions, and part of my actual email too, was about this idea of surrender, right? And about self-care a lot of times means you stop repressing the things that are part of you. Stop trying to fight your nature and embrace it. It doesn't mean, I think James, you actually had this at some point, either in your own story or on some other podcast, where you talked about surrender.
Everyone likes you.
I'm
better.
sorry. I love, I'll be honest. My first Unashamed, Unafraid podcast I ever listened to was one without you, Steve. I didn't realize.
This is
I
not
didn't realize you had
news.
anything
This
to
is
do
not
with
news.
it.
I know. I know about the James fan
Oh,
club.
James.
Anyways, keep going. So
But
James
James
shares,
shared, I remember, and this stands out to me of all the episodes I've listened to. I remember that James talked about that, like this idea of like surrender doesn't mean just, okay, cool, I don't care about it anymore. I can look at it whenever I want. It's no big deal. Like, no, it's this concept of I stopped fearing it. I stopped thinking that, me doing this meant I'm destroying myself and I'm not taking care of myself. I'm being an awful, person to my nature. Like, no, like in a lot of ways, it is intertwined with us in natural ways. And I gave in my analogy in the email was kind of like I look at it as sexual energy for me is like a river, is like a stream of water, right? That's grown and gotten stronger
mm-hmm.
and changed throughout my adolescence and into adulthood. And at some point, for some reason, I decided the only way to manage this sexual energy, it's my self-care, when it comes to my recovery, is to dam it up, right? Like put up walls as much, shut it down, put up
Yep.
the wall
Yep.
because it is too crazy. When it gets too high, I just let it roll over me and I'm masturbating, I'm doing all these other things that are against what I want to do. So I just have to stop that. But invariably, cracks are forming, and I'm sitting there putting my finger in the cracks like in a cartoon, and then another crack is popping up, and I'm trying to fill in all the
Yeah.
cracks. But ultimately, I realized very recently, like maybe I just need to break the dam down and let the water run over, but not let it control me. And how do I live within that? And how do I traverse that river and love that river for what it is, not try to run away from it, not try to control it, but care and love myself enough to know that this is part of me and I can exist in it in a healthy way. I don't know. What are your thoughts on that one?
Well, that's where I think it's the subjectivity that you're talking about. Because to me, I had this guy who's on the basketball team who had a tattoo, and it was a picture of Christ wearing the crown of thorns, and it said, "Let no man judge, but God." And there's your if you're Christian, which if you're listening to this podcast, you either are all the way in on Team Jesus or you're at least thinking about it. You're at least open to it.
Yeah.
And so that's where I want to insert like the Mere Christianity C.S. Lewis. Either Jesus was the Christ or the dude was a freaking lunatic. There's no middle ground here. Raising people from the dead, I'm the Son of God, salvation comes through me. This is not a Gandhi or a good philosopher. That's what, like, when people are like, I don't know, I accept Jesus' teachings as a good moral teacher. I'm like, no, the dude was psycho or he's the Christ. There's not a middle ground here, right? And so I think if you're willing to accept God as reality, Jesus is the Christ, there's only one person who can answer that subjective question for you and make it objective, capital T truth, and that's with God. So a lot of people in my personal life didn't want me to start Unashamed and Afraid when I started it. And I did anyways because I said I think I answer to him and I don't want to die and him be like, what happened to that podcast I inspired you to do? And I'm be like, oh, I don't know. Right. And so to me, I think when you talk about self-care or discipleship or where I'm really at in my recovery, I think when we're looking for everyone else or some other standard to tell us, it's because we're avoiding the conversation with God. No, take it to him. Either you are or you aren't. You're where you're supposed to be or you're not. So I know if I'm, I've had some struggles in my recovery recently. Had 11 months of complete sobriety, longest I'd ever been sober in a complete connection. And in having some recent struggles, I very much have gotten clear on the work that I need to do to change my life and be recovered. And I think God has it for me and I'm in it. But as far as I feel about my recovery, I mean, I can run it by you, Josh. Be like, I don't know, Josh, what do you think? You had 3 years. I didn't even have that. Or so, should you start hosting the podcast now instead of me? Because clearly I don't know, right, or whatever. But I think it just comes down to that objectivity comes from God, that judgment pass. What Kurt talks about in his book, what we talk about up at boot camp, is you've got to take it to God. And God's very tender when in those moments when we know, hey, there are some things I need to change here. Mm-hmm. Where subjectively you could justify it. There's a lot in my life, and Josh, I'm sure for you too, that you can subjectively justify. I can use 12-step language, therapy language, church language to justify a lot of things in my life currently. That real talk, I know God has objectively spoken that in my agency and choice, I need to do something about to be closer to Him in my discipleship.
Mm-hmm. And I just wanted to hit again on the surrender. Like, in a way, the surrender is that discipleship or that sacrifice that I'm talking about. It's so much of that is letting go of my own shame, because in the end, shame is actually very self-centered.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's like, can I sacrifice my ego? Can I sacrifice my desire to know it all, to overcome it all by myself? Instead, can I sacrifice or can I surrender to God that I don't have the answers, that I don't have at times complete control of my sexual desires? And then when they do wash over me in the river, am I willing in that moment to then surrender that to God and feel the pain, so-called pain of that? And be like, God, what would you have me do with this at this time? Because I'd like to act in a way that sounds like it's outside of what you would like me to do, God. You know, and right then, and I mean, to me, there's a surrender of that to where it's like, no, this isn't a big monster, but it might cause me actually to face myself in a way that's more intimate, more vulnerable.
Oh, yeah.
And to come to God in real vulnerability and intimacy of like, hey, I need to set down my ego here, God.
Yeah, surrender is
You know?
going to cost you
Yeah.
something.
Oh, absolutely.
Surrender is not a walking away, a disassociating.
Yeah.
No.
Surrender is a leaning
Yeah.
in.
For sure. And that's
Yeah.
what I'm getting
I
at.
think
Is
that's
Yeah,
what
well,
you're
and keep
saying.
waxing strong in the analogy, right? It's not like I don't have a surfboard, right? I'm not just riding it, right? I'm standing there while
Right.
this is hitting me and standing confident, standing strong, not standing fearful, but trusting that this is where I can be and stand strong with God's help and God's love and God's grace.
Yeah.
Well,
at my
Yeah.
side
Yes.
in that,
Yeah.
right? And that's the cool part of that analogy is like, yeah, it's hitting me, but in my strength as God's son with God at my side, knowing that God can do all things I can't. It's like, okay, God, here I am. I'm going to surrender this, and I may give in. You're right, and I may slip in all of that, but the goal is to continually lean into God. What's the surrender you have for me here? What's the sacrifice you have for me here? That to me, that's the discipleship. Meaning, what's the self-care I might need to do?
Yeah. Yeah.
Beyond riding this wave, or standing here in this washover, to give me the strength to manage this going forward over and over again.
Yeah, well, and I think there's something powerful to bring it back to specific recovery. I know surrender's taking place in my recovery when I'm willing to do disclosure and I'm willing to be accountable without being defensive.
Yeah. Great.
Because because surrender is about willing to come to the table with what is, not the narrative I need it to be.
Yeah.
So to me, that's a
letting go of
brass
the
tacks.
ego. Yeah.
When people are like, I surrender all the time, I'm like, cool, then go disclose. Well, I surrender, but I don't need to go to 12-step group and be with guys. AKA, I want to control how I'm seen and control what I'm doing. And so I actually don't want to surrender what 12 men in the room think about me or 10 men at my 12-step group. So I'm not going to go because I don't need it because I'm woke.
Well, yeah, or meaning
AKA,
I don't want to
surrender
surrender my shame.
Exactly.
Yeah. Well,
Exactly.
and like we saw,
Right.
what we've been talking about, I don't want to appear weak, right? I don't want to really own it. And, to James's point is like in that situation, that may be someone who's saying, yeah, I'm willing to surrender and lean on my own abilities, right? Lean on my brain, lean on my muscles, lean on my experiences in this life, right? But not actually look to my eternal divine power, and where I only have access to that is through the Spirit, is through my Savior, is through God's grace. And that's something that I think when
And
I've
other good men.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. So, hey, so I have another question. This one I didn't put in an email, but I think it's a
Yeah,
good
hit us.
transition point, right?
Last
Last
question.
question. It
Hit us
is.
with
It
the
is the
money
last
one.
question. I don't have any more after this. So again, we talked
That's
a
good.
little bit.
We've answered all the
There we go.
recovery questions.
And now I'm recovered.
There's none
And
left.
now I'm recovered.
Now he's recovered.
Stamp
Yeah.
of it's like
All of the Joshes are now
There we
having
go.
their
We
questions
did it.
answered.
Josh.
Yeah.
Everyone called Josh. He has it all figured out. He's met the perfection.
oh my goodness. Don't call me.
He's arrived.
Yeah.
So going back, right, we keep coming back to the shame concept in Frankum's book, right? But specifically thinking this has been sort of a trigger for me in ARP that this idea of
ARP
Yeah.
is the LDS
addiction
Church's
recovery
12-step
right?
program.
And so
Addiction recovery. So it's the LDS Church's
Yeah.
12 steps. So for anyone who
and
doesn't know
this
what that means.
probably, let's be honest, this probably applies to any addiction recovery program, church sponsored or not or whatever. It's this idea
Sure.
of that we're broken and need healing versus something else. Like I even shout out to amazing men in the Thursday night group I go to down here, but I've definitely had a moment or there was a moment where someone
Shout out Thursday night
Thursday
group.
night ARP, Queen Creek. You know, that crew is amazing. It's sometimes, you know, well over 30 guys in this room. And, you know, it's awesome. Just
cool.
the fellowship, the solidarity. There was a moment, though, where a good friend in that group said, it's nice to be surrounded by other broken men, sort of thing. And I like, for me, that just hit me really hard because I feel like, unfortunately, that is for me a function of shame. Is that I don't think I am broken, and I don't want to lean into this idea of that I'm broken and need healing. It's that I am divine, right? I have the capability. Am I perfect? No, and I know that, and I know why. And truly understanding that yoking yourself to the Savior doesn't mean sitting there with my legs limp and strapping on and be like, carry me, dude. It's we're both strong in our own ways, but now we're lightening that burden by being connected. Oh, both oxen are strong, right? It's not one is strong and the other one's sitting there with broken legs. So I guess my question, sorry, big intro, but it's hard for me. What are your thoughts on it? Like this idea that as babies we're all great and awesome, and then we just screw ourselves up, and God's sitting there looking at us as like, you used to be a really nice vase on the shelf, and now you're just all cracked and broken. Hopefully you take advantage of the healing that I make readily available to you because you need it, right? That's just, I don't know. What do you think?
So I guess the question I would ask is like, well, so what's a problem? What's the problem with if you are broken? Why does that bother you?
Because I guess for me, it implies a sense of failure and hopelessness.
Because like if you're broken, then you can't be put back together again.
You'll never be the same. Like I think of something that broke, I may be able to super glue it together, but it's always going to be. There's always reminders. There's always cracks there that remind me that it's broken. I told you, me
Go
and
ahead,
these
James.
analogies, bro. I'm a killer. All right, I bring it to the table.
You stepped on the wrong analogy, friend.
Well, all right. So the first thing I want to say is you said that it's like, yeah, I'll never be the same, and I would say, thank God, Josh. I hope you're never the same. I hope you're never the man you used to be. That's what growth, change, and repentance is all about.
True that.
And so to me, it's like, it reminds me of Paul. Of like, yeah, God, break me over and over again. Because I know that God mends broken things. I mean, we look at Isaiah. God makes beauty from ashes. Isaiah 61, 1-3. I have come to mend the brokenhearted and to set the captive free. Please, Lord, break my heart and then mend it and let me feel of your love in that mending and change who I am because of it. And so to me, like, hallelujah.
Yeah.
That God let me be broken, because it was through that brokenness that I tasted of his love and his salvation.
Josh, are you familiar with the Japanese art of kintsugi?
No. I mean, I've heard it, but No.
Yeah, so you can go to, so it's actually infused into the therapy company's
Yeah.
logo, Accepted. It's actually our logo. So if you go to acceptedlife.com, you can see our logo on there in the bowl. So it's the art of breaking pottery and then mending it back together with a cement glue that has gold infused in it. And one thing that is true about things that have been kintsugi'd is they're actually stronger than they were originally. And so to me, it's this
And
concept of scars.
more beautiful.
And more beautiful.
And more valuable.
And more valuable. And so to me, it's this concept of scars. So I look at my own journey and I'm like, Josh, the real reason you're sitting here talking to me and James, I understand the top shelf of, Unashamed and Afraid. We were on a podcast in recovery. You listen to blah, blah, blah. The only reason we're here is because of mine and James's and your brokenness. That's what's connecting us. That's what's been connected through mine and yours emails and brought us together today is the broken. I don't give a crap that you're a programmer. Cool that you have 4 kids. I know some people down there in Queen Creek. This is not worthy of a conversation between you and I. And I don't think you care about my life either, to be honest, which is fine. What's bringing us together, right, is this brokenness. To me, it's in that darkness of the broken where connection and growth happens. So I can tell you now, and Kayla will say it, if I had a time machine to go back, Josh, to play the game the way you're suggesting that I was never broken and I could go back and change it, if I legitimately had the time machine, I wouldn't do it. I wouldn't change it. I wouldn't change my mom having an affair when I was a kid. I wouldn't change all the sexual acting out, because one of those beautiful things I have in therapy in different settings is I often get called like, wow, you're a really safe man by women who have been harmed. That's such a gift to me because, Josh, I wasn't always a safe man. Facts, as the kids would say today.
Mm-hmm.
And so I get the fear around, if I'm broken, then it means I'm in a one down position. And I think that happens in recovery land, that because you were the one who's acted out, you're kind of in this permanent one down. And I think that's people's perfectionism and shame, whether it's a spouse or church or whatever. Like, because last time I checked, when we meet him, what we're going to be interested in seeing is the scars, not his perfect hair, chiseled abs, right? Like, we're going to be interested in the scars. Like, that's the magic. And so, I think we have a strong narrative.
I can't tell
camp.
you how much I appreciate the answer. I'm glad I asked the question, right? Because I think that those answers, both of yours, right? They showed me that, because of maybe the air in which that brokenness is presented in a group, in an addiction recovery group setting, has to do with when they're sharing their struggles, that it tends to be attached to it, when in reality, being broken is a beautiful thing. And you guys have shown me that.
Yeah, attached to identity.
Yeah, identity.
That the identity
right?
is bad.
And
that shame
versus
level.
versus growth. And
you
guys have shown me that, so I can't thank you enough. That's awesome.
Yeah. Yeah, that bowl is bad because it's broken. So this has been awesome to be with our friend Josh, who is broken and recovered.
There we go.
And if that sentence of broken, that Josh is a broken and recovered man, bothers you, we invite you to go back and listen to this
Send an email like I did.
Send an email about what we said that bothered you, and we'll connect and attach to it. And Josh, thank you for sharing your heart and your questions and coming on. I know it's a lot of questions that James and I have grown from this episode. And so, we're humbled by your courage and willingness to jump on and say it all out loud. And if you're like Josh, go ahead and send us an email, james@unashamedandafraid.com, since everyone likes you more anyways.
Or Steven at
you can email Steven. You can
unashamedandafraid.com.
email me at Steven@unashamedandafraid.com. By the way, both Joshes did email you, James. Check your inbox. And so email us, let us know. You can follow us on social media at Unashamed and Afraid, unashamedandafraid.com. You can donate and become an outsider, which allows us to do scholarships, get you access to the bonus content, be part of our community that's bold, accepted, and unashamed, helping change a lot of lives. Would love to hear from you, your thoughts on this episode and more. Also, go to iTunes and give us a 5-star rating, write a review so we can give you a shout out. That is where the world populates, and the algorithm gods decide whether or not when people search, whether they see our podcast or not. So go give us 5-star review, just like Josh is about to now when we get off this episode. And until we can be together again, we invite you to continue to be unashamed.